The MC's voice boomed through the grand ballroom, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. And now, it is my distinct honour to introduce our lead benefactor, the man whose generosity made this entire evening possible, Mr. Alex Reed, CEO of Phoenix Innovations. I watched the colour drain from my ex-wife Sarah's face. Her champagne glass trembled in her hand, her eyes wide with a disbelief that was more satisfying than any words I could have spoken. Beside her, my brother Kevin looked like he'd seen a ghost, his smug grin melting into a slack-jawed gape. They were seated at a prime table right near the stage, a table they had likely paid a premium for, desperate to be seen among the city's elite. From my position in the wings, I had a perfect view of their world shattering in real time. The polite applause felt like a tidal wave directed solely at them, pinning them in their seats. 5 years ago, they had left me to die alone, convinced my cancer diagnosis was a death sentence, and my life insurance policy was their winning lottery ticket. They stood together back then too, not at a charity gala, but in the sterile beige hallway of a hospital oncology ward. Sarah had handed me the divorce papers with the same hand that once wore my ring, while my own brother put his arm around her, comforting her for the ordeal of leaving her dying husband. They saw me as a liability, a problem to be discarded before it got too messy, too expensive. They had already calculated their future, a future built on the foundation of my demise. They cashed out my savings, maxed out our shared credit cards, and walked away, expecting me to simply fade into a sad, tragic memory. You're probably wondering how a man they discarded as worthless ended up owning the stage they were so desperate to be on. How did the dying man they abandoned become the powerful CEO whose name was on everyone's lips? The answer begins not with a diagnosis, but with a family that decided long before I was ever sick that I was born to be their stepping stone, their personal ATM, and their designated scapegoat for every failure they ever had. To understand how we got here, in this ballroom of silent screams and public humiliation, you have to understand the lifetime of betrayals that paved the way for it. My family operated on a simple, unspoken rule. Kevin was born to be loved, and I was born to be useful. He was the golden child, the charismatic son who could do no wrong. From our earliest years, I remember my parents' eyes lighting up whenever Kevin entered a room, while their gaze on me was always one of calculation. What I had done, what I could do, what they needed next. When he crashed our father's car at 16, they praised his honesty for admitting it. And I was the one who had to work a second job all summer to pay for the repairs. When Kevin flunked out of college after 2 semesters of non-stop partying, they called it finding himself. When I graduated with honours in engineering, their first question was whether my new job would allow me to help Kevin with the down payment for a new condo he wanted. My achievements were never celebrated. They were simply absorbed into the family ledger as assets to be spent on my brother. I was the fixer, the reliable one, the emergency fund. My father's calls never began with, "How are you?" but with a sigh, followed by, "Alex, your brother's in a bit of a jam." It could be anything from a gambling debt to a brilliant business idea that required a few $1,000s of seed money, money that always vanished without a trace. Saying no wasn't an option. It would trigger a storm of guilt-tripping from my mother about not loving your family, and accusations that I was selfish and arrogant for thinking my money was my own. I was trapped in a cycle of emotional blackmail, conditioned to believe that my worth was directly tied to how much I could sacrifice for them. To them, I wasn't a son. I was a utility, as functional and unloved as a circuit breaker in the basement. When I met Sarah, I desperately believed things would change. She seemed to see me for who I was, not what I could provide. She admired my work ethic and my stability, things my family took for granted. For a while, it felt like I was building a life that was truly my own, separate from their toxic orbit. But their gravitational pull was too strong. Slowly, insidiously, Sarah started to adopt their attitude. My hard work became her expectation. She saw how I always caved to my family's demands, and she learned from their playbook. "It's just to keep the peace, Alex," she'd say, when I transferred money to Kevin from the account we were saving for our own house. "You know how your mother gets." She became an extension of their system, another person who saw my backbone not as something that held me up, but as something to be bent for the convenience of others. She enjoyed the fruits of my labor, but, like them, grew to resent the labor itself. She fell for Kevin's easy charm and his life of leisure, a life that I was unknowingly financing for them both. The diagnosis came on a rainy Tuesday, stage 3 lymphoma. The doctor spoke in calm, clinical terms about treatment plans, survival rates, and side effects, but all I could hear was a loud, buzzing silence in my head. The world I had meticulously built, the career, the savings, the future I imagined with Sarah, had just cracked down the middle. When I told her, she cried. She held me and said all the right things. "We will get through this. I'm right here with you. You're so strong." For about a week, I let myself believe her. I clung to those words like a life raft in a storm. But the mask of the loving, supportive wife began to slip, chipping away piece by piece to reveal the cold, calculating woman I had refused to see for years. Her concern quickly curdled into impatience. My crushing fatigue from the initial consultations was an inconvenience to her social schedule. Her questions shifted from, "How are you feeling today?" to, "How much is this treatment actually going to cost?" and "Did you check if your work's disability insurance has kicked in yet?" She spoke of my cancer as if it were a poorly timed financial crisis that I had caused. One evening, I was resting on the sofa when I overheard her on the phone with my mother. She wasn't speaking in hushed, worried tones. Her voice was sharp, laced with frustration. "No, he's just lying on the couch again," she complained. "I honestly don't know how long this is going to drag on. We have bills to pay." That was the moment it crystallized. I wasn't her husband fighting for his life. I was a broken appliance, and she was furious about the repair bill. My family, predictably, was even worse. They visited once, bringing a cheap fruit basket and a mountain of morbid advice. My father, ever the pragmatist, cornered me in the kitchen while my mother fussed over Sarah. "Alex, you need to get your affairs in order," he said, not with malice but with a chilling detachment that was somehow more painful. "Make sure your will is updated. Sarah, your mother and I, and of course Kevin, we all need to be protected." Protected from what? The financial fallout of my illness. My brother Kevin sat on the sofa the whole time, scrolling through his phone, looking utterly bored. He offered a lazy, "Hang in there, bro," before asking Sarah if she needed help bringing some of my old stuff to the donation centre, as if I were already gone. They weren't there to support me, they were vultures circling, patiently waiting for me to fall. Sarah started taking long whispered phone calls at night. I once heard her laugh, a light, carefree sound I hadn't heard in my presence for months. I was too sick and too heartbroken to confront her, but I knew. I knew she wasn't talking to her mother, she was talking to Kevin. They were already a team, and I was the problem they were managing to its grim, and for them, profitable conclusion. The absolute lowest point of my life came during my 3rd round of chemotherapy. I was sitting in a worn-out recliner, a needle taped to my arm, the toxic drip of medicine slowly seeping into my veins, fighting to keep down the nausea. The chemo ward is a place stripped of all dignity. You are weak, you are sick, and you are utterly vulnerable. That's the location Sarah chose to deliver the final blow. She didn't come alone. My brother, Kevin, was with her, standing a few feet behind her like a shadow, his arms crossed. He couldn't bring himself to look at me. Sarah, however, stared me right in the eye. Hers were cold and clear, devoid of any of the warmth they once held. She wasn't sad or conflicted, she was on a mission. Alex, I can't do this anymore, she said, her voice flat and rehearsed, as if she'd practiced the lines in the car. I'm still young. I deserve a life. I deserve to be happy. She reached into her expensive purse, a purse I had bought her for our last anniversary, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She placed it on the small rolling table next to my chair, right beside a plastic cup of water and a vomit bag. These are the divorce papers, she stated, as if discussing a grocery list. My lawyer said it's better to get it all done now. It's just cleaner this way. Cleaner. That was the word she used to describe amputating our marriage while my body was being pumped full of poison. I was too stunned, too weak to speak. She took my silence as an invitation to continue twisting the knife. The joint savings account has been closed out, she informed me. I took what was mine, and the credit cards. Well, there were some outstanding debts that I had to settle. My blood ran cold, colder than the chemicals flowing into my arm. What was hers? I knew exactly how much was in that account. It was my entire life savings, the money meant for our future, for a house, for children. Her half was everything. As if on cue, Kevin then stepped forward, placing a proprietary hand on her shoulder. It's for the best, man, he mumbled, his gaze fixed on a point on the wall above my head. Sarah's been through enough. We're together now. There it was, the final perfect betrayal. My wife and my brother, standing together over my half-dead body to announce their relationship and serve me divorce papers. They saw a dying man, a problem that was conveniently solving itself. They were just tidying up the loose ends and collecting their inheritance before I was even in the ground. They turned and walked away, leaving the envelope and me behind. In that moment, stripped of my health, my wife, my family, and my finances, a strange clarity washed over the chemo-induced fog. The simple will to survive the cancer was suddenly eclipsed by a new burning desire, the will to live long enough to make them regret this day. For the next few weeks, I was a ghost haunting my own life. The chemotherapy ravaged my body, and the betrayal had shattered my spirit. I took the bus to my appointments alone, sat in that sterile chair alone, and returned to an empty apartment that echoed with memories of a life that had been stolen from me. The anger was there, a hot coal in the pit of my stomach, but it was directionless. It was a raw, festering wound that did nothing but poison me further. I was consumed by fantasies of what I would say to them, what I would do if I ever saw them again. But they were just that, the powerless fantasies of a sick, broke man. I was at rock bottom, with no family, no money, and a body that was at war with itself. Hope was a luxury I simply couldn't afford. That's when I met Arthur Henderson. He occupied the recliner next to mine, an older man in his late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that seemed entirely out of place in a room filled with so much quiet suffering. He was always reading, usually philosophy or history. He saw the manila envelope containing the divorce papers that I still carried in my bag, its edges tattered from being taken out and reread 100 times in disbelief. One afternoon he gestured towards them. "Bad news?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Let me guess," he continued, not waiting for an answer. "They left you when you got sick. It happens more than the nurses like to admit. A crisis doesn't create character, it reveals it." His directness was jarring, but also strangely comforting. He didn't offer the syrupy pity I'd come to expect. Over the next few chemo sessions, we started talking. He told me he was battling prostate cancer, his second bout with the disease. In his healthier years, he'd built a logistics empire from a single truck and retired a very wealthy man. He listened patiently, without interruption, as my entire story finally spilled out: the golden child brother, the transactional parents, Sarah, the money, the final cruel scene in this very ward. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. I expected him to say something cliché like, "Living well is the best revenge." Instead, he looked at me with a shrewd glint in his eye. "That's a nice sentiment for greeting cards," he said. "But true revenge is building a fortress so high they can't even dream of seeing over the walls. It's not about showing them you've won. It's about making them so small, so insignificant, they cease to matter at all. Your anger is a powerful fuel, son. Right now, you're letting it burn you alive from the inside out. You need to learn how to put it in an engine." Arthur Henderson didn't just give me hope, he gave me a blueprint. He started mentoring me, right there in our chemo chairs, on how to turn my rage into focus, my pain into a plan, and my despair into a cold, ruthless ambition. The months that followed were the hardest of my life, but for the first time, the hardship had a clear and defined purpose. Every wave of chemo-induced nausea, every day of bone-deep exhaustion, every needle and every scan was a step on a path I was choosing. Arthur's words became my mantra. I stopped seeing the treatment as something that was happening to me and started seeing it as a tool I was using to buy myself time, the time I needed to execute the plan we were building. My anger was no longer a hot, chaotic fire threatening to consume me. It became a cold, controlled burn, fueling a forge deep inside me. Arthur, my unlikely mentor, was my strategist. He'd quiz me during our overlapping sessions. "What was your field again? Systems engineering. Good. Engineers solve problems. What's the biggest, most expensive problem you saw in your old industry?" He relentlessly pushed me to think beyond my pain, to channel my analytical mind into finding an opportunity. Slowly, an idea began to form, sharpened by his questions. It was a software solution for streamlining supply chain logistics in manufacturing, a niche I knew was notoriously inefficient from my old job. I started sketching out code architecture and a business plan on cheap notebooks during the long, sleepless nights of my recovery. Arthur would look over my notes, circling a weak financial projection here, scribbling a question about market entry there. "Your family saw you as a resource to be exploited," he said one day, his voice firm. "Fine, you will now become a resource so vast, so powerful, that people like them will look like ants from the top of it." He wasn't just my mentor, he was the father figure I never had, rebuilding my shattered confidence brick by painful brick. Finally, the day came. My oncologist looked over my latest scans, shuffled some papers, and gave me a small professional smile. "The treatment was successful, Alex. We see no active disease. You're in remission." The words felt strange, almost anticlimactic. I had been so focused on fighting the war, I hadn't truly planned for the moment the cannons fell silent. But it wasn't peace I felt in that silence. It was ignition. This was the true starting line. I was alive, I was free of them, and I was free of the cancer. I found a tiny, cheap apartment on the other side of the city and sold the few remaining possessions of value that Sarah and Kevin hadn't bothered to take. It wasn't much, but it was a start. When I showed Arthur my finished business plan and told him I was ready but short on capital, he didn't hesitate. He wrote me a personal check for $50,000. "This is not a gift," he said, his gaze piercing. "This is an investment. I expect a significant return, Mr. Reed." That single act of trust, that belief in me, meant more than every dollar my family had ever drained from my accounts. With that money, I officially registered my company. I called it Phoenix Innovations. It was time to rise from the ashes. The next 3 years were a blur of pure, unadulterated work. I didn't date, I didn't take vacations, I didn't have hobbies. My life consisted of 4 walls, a powerful computer, and an unrelenting drive. I woke up, I coded, I made sales calls, I managed the business, and I slept for a few hours before doing it all over again. My tiny apartment was littered with whiteboards covered in algorithms, stacks of empty takeout containers, and technical manuals. My fuel was no longer the hot, chaotic anger of a victim. It was the cold, hard ambition Arthur had taught me to harness. Building something was a far more potent force than simply wanting to tear something down. The memory of Sarah and Kevin wasn't a constant, painful thought anymore. It was more like a photograph of a past life, a past self I had locked away. They were the why, but the what, the company, the success, the climb, had become my all-consuming purpose. Phoenix Innovations started with just me and a laptop. I landed my first client, a small local manufacturing firm, after 6 months of relentless cold calling and free demonstrations. My software did exactly what I promised. It saved them time, cut their waste, and increased their profit margin. They were ecstatic. Their glowing testimonial was the key that unlocked the next door, helping me land 2 more clients, then 5. The growth was exponential. I paid Arthur back his initial $50,000 investment with substantial interest within the first year. He simply smiled over lunch and said, "I knew you had it in you. This is only the beginning." The real turning point came 18 months in. A major multinational corporation was looking to overhaul its entire logistics management system. They were a giant, a whale in the industry pond. I spent weeks preparing for the presentation, customizing my software to solve their specific, complex problems. I was competing against huge, established tech firms with armies of salespeople, and I won. The contract was worth more money than I had ever imagined seeing in my life. That single deal catapulted Phoenix Innovations from a promising startup to a serious industry player. I finally hired my first employees, moved out of my apartment and into a sleek downtown office, and began to build a team. I worked just as hard, but now my focus shifted to strategy, expansion, and building an empire. I also took care of myself, eating well and exercising with a discipline forged in my health crisis. In the business world, to protect my privacy and prepare for the future, I became known as AJ Reed. I kept my public profile deliberately low, ensuring my full name was never front and center in press releases or interviews. I needed to be a ghost until the moment was right. After 5 years, Phoenix Innovations was valued at over $100 million. I was healthy, wealthy, and in complete control. And I knew with absolute certainty that the time for my old life to see the ghost was fast approaching. With my empire secure and my life firmly under my own control, I finally allowed myself to look back. Not with pain or nostalgia, but with the cold precision of a general surveying a battlefield before the final assault. For the first time in 5 years, I tasked my assistant with hiring a private investigator. The instructions were simple. Give me a full, unvarnished report on the lives of Sarah and Kevin Reed. The details, when they arrived in a neat binder a week later, were grimly satisfying. Kevin, my golden child brother, had proven to be exactly what I always knew he was: a spectacular failure. He had burned through my entire life savings, attempting a series of ill-conceived business ventures, a high-end vape shop, a disastrous cryptocurrency scheme, and an influencer marketing agency run out of his spare bedroom. All had collapsed, leaving him and Sarah in significant debt. The investigators' report painted a pathetic picture. They were living in a rented condo, driving leased luxury cars they could barely afford, all to maintain the fragile illusion of success. Sarah's dream life of leisure with her charming man had evaporated. She was now working a demeaning job in high-end retail, forced to flatter wealthy women she desperately wanted to be. Their primary activity, however, was frantic social climbing. They were fixtures on the local C-list charity circuit, scraping together money to buy tickets to any gala or fundraiser that might put them in the same room as a potential investor or wealthy connection. They were desperate, hungry, and utterly predictable. They were chasing the life they thought they had stolen from me and failing miserably at every turn. Reading that report, the perfect plan clicked into place in my mind. Revenge didn't need to be a messy, angry confrontation. It could be a piece of theatre performed on a grand stage under the brightest lights. I researched the most prestigious charity event of the year, the Starlight Gala for Children's Health, an event I knew they would see as the pinnacle of the social season. Through my lawyer, acting on behalf of an anonymous corporate donor, I contacted the foundation. I offered to underwrite the entire gala, the 5-star hotel ballroom, the gourmet catering, the A-list entertainment, with a donation so large it left them speechless. My only conditions were that my identity as the benefactor remain a complete secret until the night of the event, and that I be allowed to give the keynote address. They agreed immediately, of course. The buzz around the gala became immense. Rumours flew about a mysterious tech billionaire being the secret guest of honour. This, I knew, would be an irresistible bait for Sarah and Kevin. They would see it as their one big chance to finally make the connection that would solve all their problems. I could picture them pooling their last few dollars for a premium table, laying out their best clothes, practicing their fake smiles, all while walking straight into the arena I had so carefully constructed for them. They would be paying for their own public execution, and I would be the one holding the microphone. I had built my fortress, just as Arthur had advised. Now it was time to invite them inside and show them just how small they looked from the top. I took a deep breath in the wings, the MC's voice still ringing in my ears as the applause swelled. This was the moment. The culmination of 5 years of pain, discipline, and relentless effort. I straightened the knot on my tie, smoothed the front of my suit jacket, and walked out of the darkness and into the brilliant white spotlight. The stage was bright, and for a second, the hundreds of faces in the audience were just an anonymous blur. Then my eyes adjusted and found them. Table 7. Sarah's face was chalk white, her mouth hanging slightly open in disbelief. The champagne glass she had been holding was now resting on the table, a small dark puddle forming around its base where it had spilled. Kevin was frozen solid, his posture rigid, a deer caught in the blinding headlights of an oncoming train. The large screens on either side of the stage showed my face, calm and composed. But in the wide shot, their table was clearly visible. A few people seated near them were already starting to whisper, recognizing my name, putting the pieces together. I walked to the polished oak podium as the applause began to die down. I smiled, a genuine smile this time, not at them, but at the crowd. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady and clear through the state-of-the-art sound system. "It is a true honor to be here and to support the incredible work of the Starlight Foundation. This cause is about giving children a fighting chance. It's about offering hope when things seem their darkest. It's about the power of second chances." I let that phrase hang in the air for a beat. I could feel every eye in the room on me, but my focus remained locked on table 7. "I know a little something about second chances," I continued, my tone shifting subtly from philanthropic to personal. "You see, a little over 5 years ago, my life as I knew it ended. I was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. The prognosis was not good." A sympathetic murmur rippled through the audience. It's in those moments, the moments of absolute crisis, that you discover what people are truly made of. You learn who your real friends are, and you learn, with shocking clarity, who will abandon you the moment you are no longer useful to them. Sarah flinched as if I had physically struck her. Kevin was now staring intently down at his dessert plate, unable to meet my gaze. "I was left with nothing," I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing the audience into the story. "Financially ruined and left for dead by the 2 people I trusted most in the entire world." I didn't need to shout. The quiet, factual words were far more damning. But from those ashes, I found a new reason to live. I built a new life from scratch. I built a new company. I named it Phoenix Innovations for a very specific reason. I paused and looked directly at them, letting the camera operators follow my gaze. The director in the production truck must have been a genius for drama, because suddenly their horrified, ghostly white faces filled the giant screens for everyone to see. Audible gasps echoed through the ballroom. "A phoenix, as you know," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as ice, "rises from the ashes of the life that was burned down around it. And so tonight, I am pleased to announce the first initiative of the Phoenix Foundation, a new $10 million endowment dedicated to providing financial support to the families of cancer patients, so that no one is ever abandoned in their darkest hour, the way I was." The room erupted in a thunderous ovation, but Sarah and Kevin didn't hear it. They were trapped in a silent, screaming nightmare of their own making, publicly exposed and utterly humiliated. They didn't wait for the applause to fully die down. Sarah grabbed her purse and practically fled from the table, her hurried escape nearly sending her own chair crashing to the floor. Kevin followed a second later, his head bowed, pushing past waiters and astonished guests without a single word. Their exit was a spectacle in itself. The entire ballroom tracked their movement. Every face they passed was a mask of shock, thinly veiled pity, or outright contempt. The whispers followed them like a trail of smoke. I saw a prominent city councilman, a man I knew Kevin had been desperately trying to network with for months, physically turn his back on him as he scurried past. Their social execution was absolute and instantaneous. Before they even reached the grand doors of the ballroom, they had been erased. By noon the next day, the story was the talk of the town. Someone had recorded my entire speech on their phone, and the clip had gone viral within our city's social media circles. The visual of my calm, deliberate speech juxtaposed with their horrified faces plastered on the giant screens was brutally effective. It was the lead story on local gossip blogs under headlines like "CEO's shocking gala speech exposes ex-wife and brother." As a result, Sarah was promptly fired from her job at the luxury boutique. The owner coldly informed her that she was no longer compatible with the brand's image. Kevin's phone, I later learned from my investigator, was bombarded with calls from panicked creditors who had seen the news and realized his facade of impending wealth was a complete sham. They were pariahs, their names now synonymous with greed and betrayal. But for me, that was just the beginning. The public humiliation was step one. Arthur had taught me that true victory isn't just about satisfying an emotion. It's about decisive, strategic action that permanently alters the landscape. My private investigator had already flagged irregularities in Kevin's failed business dealings. Now, with a team of top-tier forensic accountants, I dug deeper. It didn't take them long to find it. To secure a large business loan for his cryptocurrency scam, Kevin had used the corporate charter of a small, long-dormant LLC my father had set up years ago, an LCL of which I was still technically a silent partner. To get the loan approved, he had forged my signature on the personal guarantee documents. He had leveraged my name and committed multiple felonies, all under the confident assumption that I would be dead and buried before anyone ever found out. He probably expected me, at worst, to sue him. He could declare bankruptcy, and it would drag on for years in a messy civil case. I had no interest in that. I wasn't after money, I was after consequences. I had my legal team package every piece of evidence, the fraudulent loan documents, the verified forgeries, the bank statements showing where the money went, into an airtight file. I didn't send it to his lawyer, I sent it directly to the Financial Crimes Division of the District Attorney's Office. A month later, Kevin was arrested at his rented condo and charged with multiple counts of bank fraud and felony forgery. The news of his arrest was the final nail in their shared coffin. Sarah was left completely alone, irrevocably tied to a man facing serious prison time, with no money, no friends, and a reputation so toxic it would follow her for the rest of her life. She had left me for a better future. I had simply ensured she had no future at all. There was one last thread that needed to be cut. A few weeks after Kevin's public arrest, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I had a feeling I knew who it would be. It was my mother. I hadn't heard her voice in over 5 years. She was sobbing, hysterical. My father soon got on the line, his voice thick with a desperate, false authority. They begged me to meet them. They just wanted to talk. They needed me to fix this, to use my power to make the charges against Kevin go away, to save their golden boy. For the last time in their lives, they needed their fixer. I agreed to a meeting at my office the next day. They arrived looking old, grey and defeated. They sat in the expensive leather chairs opposite my large desk, completely dwarfed by the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. They immediately launched into the familiar, toxic script they had used on me my entire life. My mother cried about the sanctity of family, about blood being thicker than water, about how I could be so cruel and heartless to my own brother. My father tried to reason with me, telling me I had made my point and that it was now time to be the bigger man and show mercy. They truly believed, after everything that had happened, that the old guilt trips would still work. They believed I was still the same weak, pliable boy they had raised to serve their needs. I let them exhaust themselves. When they were finally quiet, breathing heavily and looking at me with expectant eyes, I said nothing. Instead, I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen. I placed it on the polished wood between us. A voice filled the silent office. It was Sarah's, from a saved voicemail she had left for my mother 5 years ago, a message my investigator had easily recovered from old cloud backups. "Thank you again for the talk, Elaine," Sarah's younger voice chirped happily. "You're right, I just need to be strong and get it over with. Alex is just being so negative about everything. Once the life insurance is settled after he's, gone, we'll make sure you and Dad are taken care of, just like Kevin and I discussed. We're all in this together." The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than any I had ever experienced. The colour drained from my parents' faces, replaced by a ghastly, mottled grey. It was the look of final, undeniable exposure. They weren't just complicit bystanders, they were active co-conspirators in my intended demise. They had encouraged my wife to abandon me while I was dying, all while anticipating a payout from my death certificate. "He is not my brother," I said, my voice quiet but final, "and you are not my parents, not anymore." I stood up, the meeting concluded. "Kevin will face the justice he has earned, and you will receive nothing from me for the rest of your lives. We are done." I pressed a button on my desk intercom, and my assistant appeared at the door to show them out. They left without another word, two shrunken, broken people who had lost everything because they were incapable of valuing the one person who had always been there for them. My revenge was complete, but standing there, looking out at the sprawling city I now felt a part of, I realized the victory wasn't in their destruction. The real victory was in my own creation. It was in the business I had built, the health I had reclaimed, and the unshakable self-worth I had forged in the hottest of fires. I had finally learned to be my own provider, my own defender, and my own family. I thought of Arthur, who had passed away peacefully a year prior, and I smiled. He had taught me that the ultimate fortress isn't built of wealth or power, but of a spirit that can no longer be broken. They had tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed.